Hello and welcome to the second video in the Nazi Germany module. The second part of the Germany course is all about what made it so difficult to oppose Nazi rule and why some different groups failed to really challenge the Nazis before 1939. So the first section is all around terror and different instruments of terror that prevented opposition. The SS is the main instrument of terror in Nazi Germany. It's smaller than the SA, which absorbs after the Night of the Long Knives in 1934. The SA only ever has around 50,000 members compared to around 3 million in the SA. Himmler, as leader of the SS, is really relentless in his selection process with who becomes a member of the SS. It's much more elite. They wear a black uniform and, as I just mentioned, become increasingly powerful after the Night of the Long Knives. Himmler himself becomes even more powerful in 1936 when he's put in charge of all police in Germany as well, and becomes a key architect of the Holocaust as well. The second kind of element then of terror in Nazi Germany is all around intelligence gathering and investigation and interrogation. So the SD is led by the man on the screen, Reinhard Heydrich. Their role is to identify enemies or potential threats or potential enemies to the Nazi party and collect information on them. Whilst they do have thousands of employed investigators, they're heavily reliant on volunteer informers, so people providing tip-offs and information to them in Germany. They spy on all kinds of different people and gather evidence and information on a wide range of people, the arts in particular, so things like cinema and theatres and those types of things, as well as government employees and to a slightly lesser extent Jewish groups and Jewish people as well. They also monitor the foreign press, reading about what other countries are saying about Nazi Germany, and shape their propaganda to kind of counter criticism of the Nazis in foreign media. The SD, though, don't actually do anything beyond gathering and collecting the intelligence. They pass anything on to the Gestapo, the secret police. The Gestapo, in the first years of Nazi rule, are primarily interested in political opponents, but later move on to focus on other groups that the Nazis see as undesirable, including Jews and homosexuals. The Gestapo can arrest and imprison people at the drop of a hat, and torture during interrogation is commonplace. The Gestapo also rely on informants, including people called block wardens. Block wardens were people who, lived in each block of flats or apartments. One person would be the block warden to kind of keep an eye out for any sort of suspicious activity. So it could be something like people start arriving late home from work, and that would be reported. They'd then be followed to check that they weren't up to anything that they shouldn't be. So there is still an ordinary police force in Nazi Germany, just like we would expect today. They are broken up into the Orpo and the Kripo. The Orpo are the ordinary police. They investigate sort of day-to-day crimes. The Kripo are the sort of criminal police who deal with more serious crimes, things like murders. Court system, well, that changes to make judges swear an oath of loyalty to Hitler. The number of crimes that carry the death sentence and the pressure that's put on courts to pass death sentences, that ramps up dramatically. Far more crimes carry the death penalty in Nazi Germany. And also the People's Court to try political opponents is set up. The increasing use of concentration camps, over 70 are set up in 1933 alone. Initially, they're set up to house political opponents, most notably the communists, and numbers do actually drop in the second half of 1933 after the Nazis secure power. And the numbers, sort of by the summer of 1933, there's about 45 to 50,000 people in concentration camps. This drops way back down to about 7 or 8,000 by the end of 1933. But as years go on, these numbers increase dramatically. There's a group of SS men called the Death's Head Unit, and they are put in charge of concentration camps. They're specially selected members of the SS to run concentration camps, chosen specifically for their brutality and violence. Conditions in those camps, as I mentioned before, is awful. Really limited diet, bread and water, severe use of floggings and beatings to discipline prisoners, as well as many people are beaten to death as inmates of concentration camps. The law was changed in 1937 to say that essentially guards at concentration camps cannot be held responsible for the deaths of inmates. Other groups, as well as political opponents, that are then rounded up and put into concentration camps, particularly religious opponents, so people like Jehovah's Witnesses, and people that the Nazis call the work shy, so people who can't hold down a job. It could be people who are, long-term unemployed. It could be people who are things like alcoholics and drug addicts. Those types of people would find themselves in concentration camps. It's still, to a lesser extent, a way of dealing with Jewish people at this time. So the second kind of big area of how the Nazis prevent opposition, as well as terror, is propaganda. A few examples are the use of the radio. The radio is controlled by the Ministry of Propaganda, led by Joseph Goebbels. Its output is heavily controlled. Speeches are played on a regular basis, as well as traditional German music, folk music. Things like jazz music is discouraged or even banned. The Nazis also fast-track the production of the radio you can see in the image there, called the People's Receiver. This sees an explosion in the numbers of German people who have a radio in their own home. Posters are widespread and placed in prominent positions around towns and villages. Newspapers also are heavily controlled, heavily censored, and are used to promote particular messages. Der Stürmer is a famous example of a very anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish newspaper that is published. Propaganda is also used to kind of try and impress people and wow people. Things like the Nuremberg Rallies, annual processions and rallies in the city of Nuremberg. They're always held at night, so they're lit by fire. There's also kind of lots of choreographed movements. There's usually displays of military equipment and that kind of thing, as well as then the highlights being a speech by Hitler and other leading Nazis. The Olympics of 1936, again, used as an opportunity to show off what the Nazis can do, the show they're able to put on to the outside world. Film is also used. Both those events I've just mentioned, the rallies and the Olympics, are filmed. Film is still relatively new in the 1930s. With the quality of film produced in Nazi Germany is quite impressive to people, and sort of new techniques of film that we just wouldn't think of as impressive today really wows people. So things like aerial footage and shots from the sky are included in these films. So terror and propaganda makes it very, very difficult to oppose the Nazis. There is, though, three main groups that try still in these early years of Nazi rule for the Second World War. So left-wing political groups, meaning here the Communists and the Social Democrats. The Social Democrats produce leaflets and posters criticising the Nazis, even though they're banned as a political organisation. They're still relatively easy, though, to disrupt and stop. And the Gestapo does a very good job of destroying opposition and arresting Social Democrats. Crucially, these two groups do not work together. They absolutely hate each other. They hate each other pretty much as they hate the Nazis. Communists do things like producing their own newsletter, a newspaper, the Red Flag, but often the communists are quite vocal in their communist beliefs and wear red symbols and things like that. So they're easily identified, easily reported, and arrested. A notable example, though, of a communist attack on Hitler or plot to assassinate Hitler is the man who's on the screen, Georg Essler. He planted a bomb in a lectern when Hitler was about to give a speech. The bomb does go off and people are killed, but Hitler leaves, cuts his speech surprisingly short, and is unharmed. But if Hitler had spoke for as long as he normally did, the bomb would almost certainly have killed him. The next area of opposition was the church. Now, many Christians in the early phases and the early years of Nazi rule are quite supportive of the Nazis and their ideas. The Nazis are, pro-family, and many people like lots of the ideas. Many Christians like the ideas that the Nazis are promoting. The Nazis signed an agreement with the Pope Pius XI, called the Concordat, and that's basically an agreement that the Nazis will allow Catholic worship to go on unrestricted in Nazi Germany, so long as the Catholic Church doesn't criticise or try and interfere with Nazi policy. Protestants in Germany are encouraged to attend a new Reich Church, which is set up where pastors have to swear an oath of loyalty to Hitler. Notable people, though, oppose the Nazis. So two Protestants that oppose them. Martin Niemöller, he sets up an alternative to the Nazis' Reich Church called the Confessional Church. Around 6,000 pastors join, compared to around 2,000 in the Reich Church. So many Protestant ministers choose the Confessional Church rather than the official Reich Church. Niemöller also speaks out against Nazi policies. He's eventually arrested and sent to Sachsenhausen concentration camp, and then Dachau, where he remains for the rest of the war. He does survive the war, though. Paul Schneider is another one. He was the first priest to be murdered by the Nazis. He's arrested and killed basically for his preaching against the Nazis. He joined Martin Niemöller's Confessional Church, but was arrested in 1934, warned to stop criticising the Nazis, and is rearrested again before being murdered in 1939. Catholic opposition then to the Nazis, well, the Pope, despite signing the Concordat, does turn against Nazi policies as it becomes clear that their racial policies are targeting Jewish people, and the murder of disabled people becomes more well known. He wrote a letter called With Burning Anxiety, which was smuggled into Germany and read out in all Catholic churches across the country. The following day, the Gestapo raided Catholic churches, seizing copies of the letter, and this leads to greater scrutiny and crackdowns on the Catholic Church. The Pope, obviously, they're living in Rome, is beyond the Nazis' reach. Cardinal Galen, so one of the most high-profile Catholics in Germany, he was initially quite supportive of the Nazis, but again starts to speak out and give sermons criticising their policies on race. The Gestapo do question him, however, because he's so high profile and so well known, he's too much of a risk, basically, to arrest or even kill. Finally, Jehovah's Witnesses, they are just unwilling to comply with Nazi beliefs and rules, particularly around giving the Nazi salute. They believe that's worshipping of, or believe that was worshipping of Hitler, which they wouldn't do. They also are pacifists, so they're totally against violence. Therefore, men understandably refuse to join the army. Lots of Jehovah's Witnesses defy the Nazis on things like this, as well as writing anti-Nazi leaflets. The Gestapo, though, arrests many Jehovah's Witnesses and rounds them and puts them into concentration camps. The final group of people then that struggle to oppose Nazi rule are young people, and they break up into 4 different groups. We're going to mention firstly young communists. Obviously, their political beliefs make them oppose Nazi rules, and they meet and do activities such as hiking and camping, which is kind of a cover for them to have political meetings. Young Christians, again, similar reasons as the older people we've just mentioned for their opposition to the Nazis. They refuse to join official Hitler Youth groups, meet together and go on again illegal tours and pilgrimages to different sites around Germany. Swing kids, well, they're more interested in American jazz music, which is strongly frowned upon by the Nazis. The swing kids dislike the conformity and rules of the Hitler Youth. They basically just meet up to dance and to drink and have a good time. The final group, the Edelweiss Pilots, they wear a white flower somewhere on their clothing, on their lapel, on the jacket lapel. They sing, listen to foreign radio, produce leaflets, paint graffiti on walls, beat up Hitler Youth members. That opposition to the Nazis continues throughout the 12 years of Nazi rule. Some of them are even executed for their activities during the Second World War. So this second section then, all around why it's so difficult to oppose Nazi rule. Think about the use of terror to intimidate and frighten people, propaganda to indoctrinate and make people believe certain things. Makes it very, very difficult for different groups, such as political opponents, church opposition, and young people to actually be able to fight back.